Hi everyone, I'm Gertie, and I am so excited to introduce to you our newest charm pattern, which is called the Monroe Dress. This was inspired by one of my favorite dresses that Marilyn Monroe wears in a movie. It's the blue and white polka dot dress from the movie The 7-Year Itch. This dress is really special, and I've tried to recreate some of those special details in our new pattern. So it has these beautiful crisscross straps that form wide set straps in the back and a halter in the front, and gathers at the neckline for a beautiful bodice. But I really think that where this pattern shines is the skirt. It has some very special details. It has a box pleated center front that gets sewn down into a drape, and then these inset side pieces with gathers that form ruching over the hips. It's sewn in a really lightweight, fluid fabric, so you get really beautiful movement to it. Now, the other thing that's really special about this dress that we have created here at Charm is the interior support. We have provided an optional interior bra so that you wouldn't have to wear a separate bra with this dress. I'm really proud of how this bra turned out. So it's made out of power mesh with a wide band at the bottom and a back closure, but it also has added cups that we're going to show you how to customize for a 50s bullet bra shape. And of course, the whole thing is fully lined for a beautiful finish on the inside. Now, of course, if you're not into this very intricate skirt, we've given you another option, which is that the lining pieces for the skirt actually form a beautiful alternative on their own, just a simple slim skirt that you can use to make a different style with this dress. But speaking of different styles, this pattern is interchangeable in the Charm Patterns Lamour series, which means you have a ton of other options for bodices and skirts that you can swap out. So if you love this bodice and you want to make some different variations with it, you could do a circle skirt, for instance, or something like the Loretta shorts to make an adorable little romper. And of course, you can also use some of our other Lamour bodices, like the Liz bodice, with this beautiful pleated draped skirt to get a different look as well. So lots of possibilities. So today we're going to be showing you how to sew the entire thing from start to finish. But first, we're going to start by talking about the pattern pieces so you can understand how the pattern comes together. And then we'll get into talking about fabric and supplies. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go through all of the pattern pieces together. This is something I like to do every video so that you can see them all together, minimized down to 25%. And this will help you get a sense of how the pattern goes together before you start to sew it. So I know it looks a little complicated when we see them all on the table together, but I promise you it's not that confusing. We're going to talk through every single piece. So let's start with the bodice pieces. So this is your bodice front. You're going to cut one fabric and one lining on the fold. There are a couple important marks on this piece. We've got a circle here and then one at center front. These are your gathering circles. So you're going to gather between those two circles to get that beautiful gathered neckline. We also have a dart that you're going to want to transfer to the wrong side of your fabric on both the lining and your outer fabric. Then let's go to the back bodice. This is your side back bodice. You're going to cut two fabric and two lining, and same for the center back bodice. Now, I want you to note on these two pieces that we have a couple marks for boning channels. So that's what this line here is. That, along with the side seam, will give you the indication of where your boning channel goes. And then on the center back bodice, you have two lines parallel to each other. You're going to mark both of those for your back boning channel. Okay, now let's look at the strap pieces. This dress is really unique in the way the strap is constructed, because the strap is going to get sewn to the upper bodice like this, and it forms a band, and then it crisscrosses to form straps that then get attached in the back bodice, okay? So that's why it's so long, and you do have gathering circles to match to your front bodice here. So keep that in mind. That will help you know how evenly or how tightly to distribute the gathers on the bodice front. And then we have our back bodice strap / band. Again, you have a couple circles there to transfer and notches to help you line things up. So those two strap pieces are going to be cut for fabric and cut for interfacing. If you're using a fabric that is scratchy at all, like say maybe a lame or a lurex, like the dress I'm wearing, you would want to, instead of cutting 4 of your fabric, cut 2 fabric and 2 lining so that you have something softer against the skin for the inner strap. Just a suggestion. Okay, so then let's look at our skirt pieces. This funny looking piece is your skirt front. You're going to cut 1 on fold of your dress fabric. Now, this sort of cutout shape here is where we're going to insert the side front skirt to form that beautifully ruched panel on the side. You'll also see that you have pleat marks at center front. You're going to want to mark this 1 pleat line on the right side of your fabric in a light colored chalk. It will get covered up when you fold the box pleat over it, so keep that in mind, but still use something that's not going to be too dark or bright. You're going to want to transfer these circles. These correspond to the gathering circles on the side front skirt. You have a couple notches to transfer. And then your back skirt has a separate yoke piece. The front yoke is formed all in one piece with the skirt front. The back yoke has a separate upper yoke piece, the back skirt. So you're going to cut 2 of this and 2 of the lower back skirt. You also have a dart here and a notch that will match up to it. Okay, if you're doing a lined skirt, which is a great idea, then you're going to need to cut these pieces as well. You have your skirt front lining, cut 1 on the fold, and your skirt back lining, which will be cut 2. Now also keep in mind that these 2 pieces can be used to make a beautiful, simple, slim outer skirt as an alternative to this more complex skirt here. So if that's the option you would like to choose, then you're going to be cutting these in your dress fabric. And then finally, we have the inner bra pieces. And keep in mind that this is optional. You don't have to sew the inner bra, but if you would like to, it's a really amazing inner support touch to this dress. So this front bra, you would cut 2 power net on fold. And then the back bra piece, you would cut 4 power net on the fold. And we're going to take you through every step of constructing that bra and adding the cups to it. Okay, so those are all your pattern pieces. I told you it's not that bad. Next, we're going to move on to fabric and supplies. Okay, now we are good to look at fabric and supplies now that we've seen all the pattern pieces. So first, let's talk a little bit about recommended fabrics for this dress. I really love something that has a little bit of fluidity, a little bit of drape to it, and we have a lot of different options that you can use. You're looking for something on the light to medium weight side. So woven fabrics in particular, you do not want to knit for this dress, but you could use something, a woven that has a little bit of lycra blended in. One of my favorite fabrics for this dress, and this is what we did some of the first tests in the studio, this is a lyocell twill. Lyocell is similar to rayon. It has a really beautiful fluid drape to it, which you can see. And this fabric is just perfect for this dress. So something that has a similar drape to this lyocell twill would be really nice. Another fabric that I really love for the Monroe dress is a rayon challis. As you can see, similar floaty fluidity to it. Really beautiful, comes in a lot of lovely prints. If you're a fan of silk, we could do a lightweight crepe de chine, which would be beautiful. As you can see, similar drape and weight to the first 2 fabrics we looked at. And if you really want to elevate this dress with a special fabric, 4-ply silk crepe has a little bit of a beefier feel to it, but that same beautiful drape. It can be pricey though, but really if you're looking for a spectacular dress, maybe you want to make an evening gown or a wedding dress even with this pattern, this would be a beautiful choice. Speaking of elevated fabrics, if you want something a little bit glitzier, I love the idea of a lame for this fabric. And one of our samples for the photo shoot is in this fabric, and it's evening gown length. This is a metallic lame. You can see on one side it's sort of a duller black, and on this side it has this beautiful emerald green shimmer to it. And then finally, if you're a less experienced sewist or you want something a little bit easier to sew than these fabrics, these do slip around a little bit, and maybe you want something a little more casual for every day, you could use a cotton like a poplin or a broadcloth. We made one of our samples in a cotton batik and it looked beautiful. I will say the pleats on the skirt will probably not drape quite as nicely in this type of fabric. So you could either choose the slim skirt without the pleat, or you could substitute another one of the skirts from the Lamour series, like our circle skirt, or even the Loretta shorts for a cute little romper would be adorable in a cotton poplin or broadcloth. So those are your outer fabrics. Let's talk about the inner workings of the dress, or your utility fabrics, as I like to call them. So you will need a lining fabric for this dress. The important thing about the lining fabric is that it should match the weight and the drape of your outer fabric. So we ended up using Bemberg lining fabric for a lot of our samples. This is a rayon fabric, and you can see it's pretty sheer and it drapes similarly to the outer fabrics we've suggested. So it can be a little bit difficult to cut. I would recommend using a rotary cutter or even layers of tissue paper to stabilize your fabric. If you're making a more spectacular dress for a special occasion, you can also line your dress in silk charmeuse. You can see this has a really beautiful sheen and is more opaque than the Bemberg. If you're making your outer dress in cotton, then look for a lawn or a batiste or another lightweight cotton fabric to line your dress in. If you're doing the optional bra, you will need power net. And we recommend using a sturdy power net. We have this heavy weight here that we use in the studio all the time for various applications, and I will link you to this in the instructions. So you can see it has a little bit of sturdiness to it. And then finally, you are going to need some fusible interfacing for your straps. So I would recommend looking for something that has a lightweight drape to it, similar to your outer fabric. This is a lightweight woven interfacing. This would be great, or a tricot or weft fusible interfacing. Okay, let's talk about other supplies now that we've talked about fabrics. This dress does have interior spiral steel boning on the side seams and at the center back. So you're going to need some spiral steel boning. You can buy it in a continuous roll or separate pieces. You may need to cut it down to the correct length. You probably will, and we're going to show you how to do that today. So we like to use Teflon tape to finish our ends here at the Charm Studio. It's easier than those little caps that you can apply. It's much easier to apply and gives you a smoother, less bulky sort of finish on the ends. So, and we even managed to find the Teflon tape in pink, Charm Pink. But this is just in your plumbing department at your hardware store. You will need channeling for your bones. And this is specific boning channeling. As you can see, it's a tube, so you insert the bone inside. But you can also use something like double fold bias tape or twill tape or something like that to sort of make your own channels. You will need an 18-inch zipper for this dress, and you're looking for a regular zipper, not invisible. Needles for your sewing machine. We really like to use Microtex needles here in the Charm Studio because they're so versatile and very sharp for these delicate fabrics. So a 70-10 size would be a good size to match the weight of these fabrics. We recommend this in probably every Charm video. This is fusible stay tape. It's 1.25 inches wide. It's really just fusible interfacing cut to the correct width to stabilize your zipper opening on a roll. So it's really handy to have, but if you don't have it, you can also just cut 1.25 inch wide strips of your fusible interfacing yardage to get the same effect of stabilizing your zipper opening. Okay, thread. You're going to want all-purpose polyester thread to match your dress and lining fabrics. Let's talk about the inner bra supplies. Again, these are optional. You're going to want cups. And these are 2 different sizes of cups. We have a great source for these, and it comes in different skin tones and all the different cup sizes in a really inclusive range. So we'll give you the link for that. This is a size C, and I believe this is the D. So you can see that these are a little on the flatter side. What we're going to be showing you today is how to form a little dart in these cups to get a sort of more 50s bullet bra silhouette. So you'll want the cups in your size. We're going to show you how to insert them into the bra, no matter what size you are, it doesn't matter. And then you're going to need elastic, a 2-inch elastic. We found a great source for this nice soft elastic, but it's quite sturdy. It's going to give you that support at the bottom of the bra. And then finally, you are going to need a bra closure. And again, we have a source that we really like for these, but what you're going to be looking for is the 4-hook closure. I just measured these. These are 2 7/8 of an inch tall. So that's the height you're going to be looking for if you don't use the exact same ones as us, because we have drafted that back inner bra piece to fit perfectly with this bra closure and this width elastic. And we're going to take you through every step of constructing that inner bra. Okay, so those are your fabric and supplies, and next we are finally going to get sewing. Okay, so we are going to see Andrea sewing for us today, so thank you, Andrea. And the first thing we're going to do is sew the bust darts in the bodice. So we have them marked in on the wrong side of your fabric, and what you want to do is put the fabric right sides together. And you're going to put a little pin at the end of the dart just to remind yourself to stop. Then line up the dart legs. And we like to use little clips at the end of our dart legs, just like you would clip into a notch on a pattern. And that helps you align the dart legs. But then you want to pin down the dart leg, making sure that those lines are perfectly aligned on top of each other. So the best way to do this is to use a pin and to put the pin through the top layer. Try to align it and then check underneath like Andrea is doing right now and make sure that those lines are perfectly aligned on top of each other. And if they're not, just adjust and try again. So you're going to pin down the leg of the dart like so. And now we're ready to sew. From the raw edge of the fabric where your clip is towards the point where you put that cross pin. So when you start sewing your dart, you're going to backstitch to secure it. And this is how we always start darts. You're going to sew along the line towards the point. And then when you get to your point, you're going to veer off as gracefully as possible, just a couple stitches on the edge of the fabric. You don't want to be too abrupt with it. And pull out that cross pin. And then don't backstitch, leave yourself a couple inches of thread that you are then going to hand tie into a double knot. Now we want to press these darts down. So a tailor's ham is a great way to do this. Put the dart on top of the tailor's ham to kind of mimic the curve of the body and press the dart down towards the waistline. Okay, so there's one dart sewn. We're going to repeat that process on the other side, on the other bust dart, and then come back for the next step. The next thing we're going to do is assemble the bodice seams, starting with the back princess seam. So we're going to pin the center back panel to the side back panel, matching at the notches. And you can see the center back is already stabilized with that 1.25 inch wide stay tape. And now we're pinning along the raw edges, right sides together. And one little thing to note that sometimes trips people up is you might see a little bit of an overhang at the top of this seam because you're matching up the 5/8 of an inch seam line, not just the raw edge. So you have a little tail at the top of this seam. And you're going to sew at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance using a 2.5 millimeter long stitch length. And now we're going to press this seam open. Now grab your bodice front and we're going to sew our side seams the exact same way. So right sides together, we're going to go ahead and do that off camera and then we'll be right back. Okay, so now we're also going to press this seam allowance open, our side seam. And we're going to repeat that whole process for the other side of the bodice, sewing the back princess seam first, then the side seam, and then pressing open. And next we'll move on to our boning channels. Okay, so what I want to note is that we're working on the bodice lining now, not the outer bodice, and we constructed it just the same as for the outer bodice. It's the exact same color, unfortunately. Usually we try to use a slightly different color for the lining on video, but this one is this beautiful bottle green color that I'm really into right now, and it's a Bemberg lining fabric. So what we're doing now is we're applying boning channels to the wrong side of the lining center back panel. And there's that boning placement line to guide you there. And you're aligning the edge of the bone channel with that placement line and pinning it in place. Some people like to avoid the upper and lower seam allowances with their boning channels. I think it's totally fine to just sew it top to bottom, raw edge to raw edge, and the boning channels will get caught in the seams. So you're going to do the one close to center back, which supports the zipper, and then we're going to do the side seam. And for the side seam, you're just going to place that bone channel right over the pressed open side seam, centering it as best you can. Now, if you wanted even more support, you could do another bone channel on the back princess seam. We used a sort of lighter approach on this bodice because we have the inner bra for support. So if you wanted that extra bone channel, you could definitely do that just for a little extra stability. And now we're going to stitch along the edges of each boning channel. So you can see on this bone channel that there's like a little ridge next to the edge that should guide you and show you where you need to be stitching. So you can either eyeball it or you can use an edge stitch foot, but you want to be stitching just about 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of the boning channel. Andrea's superpower is stitching really, really straight just with no guide, so she's not using a special foot, but you certainly could use an edge stitch. Or a blind hem foot is another great substitute for an edge stitch foot. So we're going to stitch up both sides of each bone channel. And the boning doesn't actually get inserted until much later in the process. For now, we're just applying the channels, and then we'll move on to the next step. So there's one channel edge stitched on both sides. You might see a little bit of rippling here, which is totally normal. You can just press that out, give it a nice little steam. Be careful though, if your lining fabric is synthetic, it might melt. So really test it out first. You're gonna repeat that with the side seam, and then you're gonna repeat that process with the two boning channels on the opposite side of the bodice. All right, so now we are going to put the bodice and the bodice lining wrong sides together. So those open seam allowances will be clean finished on the inside between these two layers. This neckline is kind of wild, so let's take a moment to look at these dots here. These circles are for your gathering stitches. There's one at center front and then one on either side of it for your gathering stitches. So you'll have two separate sections of gathering stitches, and you're going to break them at the center dot. Okay, so we're going to take this step by step, and you'll see what I mean. So we're going to pin these wrong sides together at each of the dots, and then continue to pin, matching those raw edges. And what you might want to do is give yourself a little X at each one of those circles so that you know where you need to stop and do something new, essentially. So that will remind you that that's where you're going to start your gathering stitches. Okay, now we're going to match our side seams. Just match any match points like those side seams, the back princess seams. But one thing very important here, you don't want to pin all the way to the center back edge. You need to leave 2 inches open at the center back so that we are able to do our clean finish with the back zipper and the lining later. So you're going to measure in 2 inches from the center back edge and then put your first pin there. On this size, this is just about at the back boning channel. And so you can see we're putting another crossed pin here to remind us not to stitch beyond that. Okay, so you're going to repeat all of that pinning on the other side, and then we're going to go to the machine and stitch this. Okay, so now we're going to start stitching at our first X'd pins. That's 2 inches away from the center back. And just stitching these 2 layers together at 1/2 inch. And you're going to keep stitching as usual until you get to your next set of X pins, which is where your gathering stitches are going to start. Okay, so I see them coming up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch until we get to that circle where those X'd pins are. You can backstitch, break your stitching, and now you're going to go to the other side of the bodice, the opposite side. We're going to leave the center free for now because we're going to come back and do our gathering stitches in just a minute. But start at the opposite side, same spot, backstitch, and then continue stitching these 2 layers together until you get to your next set of X'd pins, which should be 2 inches from the center back on the opposite side. I'm glad we're taking you through this step by step because this bodice is really different from anything we've done before and is pretty intricate with how you sew the strap and the shape of this gathered neckline, which is so beautiful. Okay, so here are X pins. We're going to backstitch there. So now we're going to go back and concentrate on our gathers, which are between the 2 sets of circles at the front neckline. You want to switch your stitch length to around 4 to 5 millimeters long. That's your gathering length. And make sure that you have a nice long thread tail there. And now we're going to be working at 1/2 inch. Don't backstitch. Starting at your first gathering circle and stitching 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then you're going to break your stitching again, leave thread tails at the center front circle. Now we're going to go back and do our second line of gathering stitches at 1/4 inch, just right next to that last one that we did. So you have 2 rows right next to each other, 1/4 inch apart. And now we're going to repeat this just past that center front circle, doing a second section of gathering stitches between the center front circle and the next gathering circle. Okay, so again, stitching at 1/2 inch, leaving your thread tails, going back and doing a second line of gathering stitches at 1/4 inch. It's best to do this gathering in 2 sections like this with a break at center front. That's going to give you the nicest result rather than trying to do it all in one go. Okay, so you have a lot of thread tails here that you're going to be able to pull up to gather in the next stages. The next thing we're going to do is sew our strap side seams, and we're going to be starting with the set of straps that's interfaced, and this will be the outer strap. And you want to match these little short ends together, right sides together, and match the notches. And it's very easy to sew these on upside down, so match your notches, and what you're going to be looking for is the back strap angles downwards, okay? It shouldn't be angling upwards. The back of this dress has a beautiful dip in the back, one of the things I love about the original Marilyn Monroe design. So make sure that your straps are correctly angled downward towards center back. And now we're going to stitch them at 5/8 inch using your regular stitch length. Make sure to switch back to 2.5 millimeters after doing those gathering stitches. And just like that first seam we sewed on the bodice back, you'll notice you have a little tail on these seam allowances that will extend past. Don't worry about that. You're doing everything right. The seam lines will still match up. So this is the shape of one side of the strap once you've sewn it. You're going to repeat this with your other straps, the interfaced set and the non-interfaced set. And then we're going to move on to the next step. All right, so now we're going to attach the set of interface straps to the bodice unit one side at a time. So you're going to put these right sides together. When you put them right sides together, they'll be going at slightly different angles. So you need to take your time to match up all your match points. So for instance, there are notches on the straps to match to the seams on the bodice. So make sure you're using those and matching them. And once again, we have an important thing to note, 2 inches from the center back. We're going to stop here and only stitch the strap to the outer bodice, not to the lining. So you're going to need to break your stitching, move your lining out of the way, and continue. We had some community ambassadors sew this pattern before we released it, and this was the part that they had the most trouble with because we were working without a video and without instructions. So this can be kind of hard to visualize, so I'm so glad we have this video for you so you can see it in action, because this little 2-inch flap can get really confusing. And then we're going to continue pinning to center front. Put 1 pin there, and that's where we're going to stop stitching. Now, you may remember that this is where we put our gathering stitches, but we haven't pulled the gathering stitches yet. So the gathered section, for now, just leave free, and you'll have a lot of slack there. And the next thing we're going to do is pull up the bobbin threads on those gathering stitches to get it to match the strap. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next. We're pulling up the bobbin threads after matching at center front. So pull them up to create those gathers. And the most important thing about gathers is that you want them to be evenly distributed, right? So you're going to use your fingers like Andrea is to sort of press them down and make sure that they're nicely distributed between your sets of circles. And you can kind of rearrange them if you need to and just spend a little time making sure that they look nice. Okay, so we're going to do this on one side and then we'll come back and do the second strap. So just worry about one side at a time. But we're going to keep pinning here. The pinning and the gathering takes a little bit of time, so take your time with that. We're going to keep pinning, and then we'll come back to sew the strap. Okay, so we're starting at the edge here, and remember, you're not catching your lining in these first 2 inches. You're just sewing the outer bodice to the strap, and the lining flap is folded out of the way. And we're sewing at 5/8 of an inch using our 2.5 millimeter stitch length. And then when you get to the fold of the lining, you're going to backstitch, break your stitching, come back at that 2-inch spot and restart your stitching. So what you've done is you're stitching the strap to the bodice, but just leaving the lining free for the 2 inches at the center back. It's one of those things that's really hard to explain in words and instructions, but it will make sense once you do the clean finish for your lap zipper. And now we're going to continue to stitch at 5/8 of an inch. When you get to your gathers, just make sure that they stay nice and even, and you can kind of manipulate them with your fingers. And then you're going to backstitch at center front and break your stitching. And you're going to repeat this for the other side of the bodice, okay? Same exact thing with the second strap. So this is what it looks like on this side, just sewn to center front. And now we're ready to do the other strap. Okay, so now you can see we have both sides of the interface straps attached to the neckline edge, and we've pressed the seam allowances up. And then we're going to move on to sewing the uninterfaced straps to the interface straps. So again, one side at a time, and you've got a lot of tentacles going on here, so I'm going to try to explain this as best I can, but there's a lot going on. Okay, so you're going to start at center front, all right? So you're going to match your uninterfaced strap to your interface strap exactly at the center front circle and pin them together there. And we're going to pin from the center front circle to center back, okay? And that's all we're worrying about in this step. So starting at center front, it's really important that you match those circles together exactly and that you start stitching exactly at that circle, okay? That's how you get a really beautiful overlapping strap detail here on the front bodice. Okay, so now that we have been very fiddly about our center front circle, now we can just continue to match up the rest of this strap. And it's pretty simple from here on out. The one thing I would warn you about is that the uninterfaced straps can start to stretch pretty easily, especially when you're handling them a lot. So you want to make sure that you're being careful with them, not to stretch them out, and that also that you may need to spend a little extra time pinning if they've stretched at all, and making sure that they match the interface strap. Okay, so we're pinning them together, and then we're going to start stitching right at that center front circle, keeping everything else out of the way. Back stitching at center front, you're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch, continue on to the center back edge, and then we can move on to the next step. Okay, so in the last steps, we sewed the loose end of the strap, the shoulder edge that's going to get attached to the bodice back. Now we're going to sew the neckline side of the strap. But first, we are going to do our clean finish at center back. So put the strap right sides together, and then on the bodice right back, we are going to turn the seam allowances 1/2 inch towards us and nest them inside each other. So this is a technique I've been teaching forever. So if you've watched any of our videos, you've probably seen it before. This is a clean finish with a lap zipper. And it's just a couple preparatory steps that we do to make sure that we get a really nice professional finish inside the center back where we do the lap zipper. And a lap zipper is such a vintage look that I use them on all of my garments, almost all. And so we use this clean finish a lot. Okay, so on the left side of the back bodice, you're putting this right sides together, and the measurements are slightly different on this side. You're matching, aligning everything at center back, and then the uninterfaced strap, you're turning towards you, towards the wrong side, 7/8 of an inch. So make sure you're really measuring this. Get out your tiny ruler like Andrea has. You can measure 7/8 of an inch, press that in. And then you're going to do the bodice separately, and it's only going to be turned in the same direction, but 5/8 of an inch. So that means that you'll have a 1/4 inch gap in between the two layers there, and that's exactly what you want. You want to see a little 1/4 inch space in between those two back edges. And that's what's going to allow for the strap lining to turn in and clear the zipper so you don't get a lot of bulk or a weird fold that you have to kind of try to veer away off the zipper on the inside. It's going to be a beautiful finish on the inside. So it's a couple extra steps, but it gives you a really nice finish on the inside. Okay, so you're going to pin those layers together at center back. That's your clean finish or your prep for it. And then you're going to continue pinning along this strap edge, matching your notches to your seams. And there's an opening that we need to leave at center back between those marks, and that is where your back strap gets inserted and stitched to the bodice back. So you can give yourself 2 X'd pins, sets of pins, on those marks to remind yourself to not stitch there. And then you're going to continue pinning all the way back to that end. And we've already sewed one side of it in the last chapter. So I know this is a lot, and I know it's a little confusing, but it's going to be so worth it. These straps are really the sort of crowning jewel on this dress. They look so gorgeous once they're sewn. So take your time with this. Don't try to do this at the end of a long sewing night. Maybe start fresh the next morning. Okay, now we're going to start stitching at that short end of the strap. And we're going to continue stitching, and the only thing I want to make sure that you remember is when you get to your X pins, you are going to leave open in between them. You're going to break your stitching, leave it open, and then continue your stitching at the other circle mark. But for now, just continue stitching from one end to the other, leaving that little opening. Okay, and when you finish sewing the seam, you're going to sew right up to those folds. And now we are going to grade our seam allowances. Of course, that means that one seam allowance is going to be slightly shorter or narrower than the other one. And on this dress, you're going to make the uninterfaced seam allowance should always be the narrower one. So you could trim that down to about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more. And you're going to skip that little section where we didn't stitch the neckline, and then continue grading towards center back. And then the interface seam allowance can be slightly wider, about 1/8 of an inch wider. And this is just to reduce any bulk in the seam allowances, and also so you don't see a ridge when you turn the strap right side out from having two seam allowances right on top of each other. At center back, you can trim diagonally, again, to reduce bulk there. And you're going to do the same thing on the opposite side of the strap, just grading down those seam allowances, one slightly narrower than the other. And you can clip into your center front circle. So do that on both sides. And now we're going to turn this strap right side out. So it's short enough that you should be able to just work it with your fingers here. You probably don't need a tool, but if you have a tool that you like, you could use it here. And just turn both straps right side out. And now this pressing is really important to the look of your finished dress. So take your time here. See how Andrea is using her fingertips to roll the seam line out to the edge? That's what you want to be doing. And we're working here from the wrong side. So what you want to be doing is rolling the seam line so that it's kind of hidden on the wrong side of the strap, so that you're not seeing the seam line show on the right side. You're kind of cheating it a little bit so that the seam is rolling towards the underside. And really spend your time here. This is one of those parts that's really important to getting a professional look on this dress. So that's the loose end of the strap, right? That's the one that's going to go around your shoulder and attach to the back bodice. And now we're going to continue. This is the part that goes under your arm to the back neckline. Okay, and now we're just going to press the strap, the uninterfaced strap, to the inside of the dress. And again, just rolling the edge here. Now you could understitch this here. If you're an advanced sewer, you might be thinking, hey, why didn't they understitch this? And this would be a great place to understitch. So you could certainly do that. Of course, you want to skip that little section right there where we're going to be inserting the strap end. But understitching is a step that kind of helps you roll the seam line for a nice crisp edge. Not totally necessary, so if you didn't do it, that's totally fine, but you do need to take your time to roll that seam line out to the edge so you get a nice crisp finish here. And at center back, that's our clean finish there. You're going to really make sure that everything is turned in nicely. Your seam allowances stay pressed the way that you did at center back. And now we are going to turn in this raw edge, this seam allowance on this uninterfaced strap, and you're going to press it in 5/8 of an inch. So take your time with this. We're going to keep pressing here. You're going to see what Andrea is about to do, which is to turn in 5/8 of an inch and press that seam allowance in along this back neckline edge here. So continue with that, and then we'll come back in just a second. Okay, so now that that seam allowance is turned in, you can turn the whole strap to the inside, and hopefully you're seeing the vision here. We're going to be getting a nice clean finish on the inside of the dress, and those seam allowances will be encased in that strap. All right, so do all those steps, take your time, and then we're ready to move on. So now we're going to move on to the bra steps. So again, the inner bra is optional. So if you're not doing the inner bra, you can skip all the bra chapters. But now we're going to focus on this really amazing, complex inner bra, starting with the bra backs. So you've got 4 of these cut in power net, and you're going to pin a set of 2 together at the upper edge, okay? And now we're stitching this at 5/8 of an inch, but I would use a zigzag stitch here because this is a knit fabric that stretches. So, you could use 2.5 on your width, 2.5 on your length, and that should do it here. Stitching at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance from one end to the other. And now we're going to trim these seam allowances down. I wouldn't worry about grading these. You can just trim them to about 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more. And this will clean finish the upper edge of the back bra. And now turn this to the right side and sort of use your fingertips to roll the seam line out to the edge. Power net, you don't want to apply high heat to, so just kind of finger press this and pin it. So these bra backs will be loose on the inside of the dress and hook at center back. Okay, now we're going to top stitch these together. About 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch is fine. I would use a zigzag stitch again because, again, we need this piece to stretch. So you need a stitch that stretches. And because we can't really press these pieces that effectively, this will just hold the layers in place. Okay, so now the raw edges, these open edges, you're going to pin them together and we're just going to baste them next. The lower edge of the bra back will be finished with that 2-inch wide elastic. But for now, these open edges, you're just going to baste together, but use your zigzag stitch here again and stitch at 1/2 inch. You can break at your corners rather than pivoting. That kind of helps the layers stay a little bit flatter. Okay, so now you have one bra back that is finished at the upper edge and basted together at the other edges. You're going to repeat that for the other side of the bra back, and then we can move on to the next bra step. The next thing we're going to do is sew the bra side seams. So you'll notice that we're using a double layer of power net for the front. This is the bra front, follows the shape of the front neckline. So you can just do one layer if you want, in which case you would just sew the bra backs to one layer of power mesh. But we're using 2 layers for extra support and stability. So we're going to be sandwiching the bra backs in between 2 layers of the bra front. So you're going to be matching notches, but you're going to notice that because we've already finished the upper edge of the bra back, it's going to end 5/8 of an inch below the unfinished edges of the bra front. So keep that in mind. The bra back is sandwiched in between those 2 layers of bra front. And the bra fronts are wrong sides together. Right sides together. Sorry, they're right sides together. And you may notice that your bra backs are angling down quite a bit, and that's exactly what you want because this bra does have a low back shape.
okay? So that's what it should look like. They should be angled down. You may look at that shape and think you're doing something wrong, but you are not. Okay, so repeat those steps for the other side. We're just pinning here. And then we're going to sew these side seams right sides together, sandwiching those bra backs in between. Okay, so now we're using our zigzag stitch again, stitching at 5/8 of an inch from top to bottom. So do that for both sides. Make sure you're back stitching on both ends. All right, so now we're going to trim those seam allowances down just to get rid of any bulk on the side seams. And now turn the whole thing right sides out and then align the raw edges along the upper neckline. Give it just a quick little press here at the side seams just to hold all those layers kind of flat. And pin together at the upper neckline and the lower edge. And now you may notice there's absolutely no shape built into this bra right now, right? And so in the next chapter, we're going to do the really exciting work of building in those contoured bra cups with that very Marilyn shape to them. So I'm excited to show that to you. But for now, we've just got a very flat bra front, and we're pinning those edges together along the upper edge and the lower edge, and then you'll baste them together at 1/2 inch. Okay, so that's what it'll look like after you've basted the upper and lower edges, and then we're ready to move on. Next, we're going to be attaching the 2-inch wide elastic to the lower edge of the bra. So you want to do some math here. You want to measure the lower edge of the power net bra. So for the size 8, we're getting 30 inches. Then you want to calculate what is 80% of that. So that would be 24 inches. And then you want to add back 2 inches. Okay, and that's how long you want to cut your 2-inch wide elastic. So we're cutting ours to 26 inches, and we're just leaving 1 inch on either side to make the sewing a bit easier. It will eventually get trimmed off. So now what we're doing is working from the right side of the bra. You want to find the center of both the bra and the elastic. So fold it in half lengthwise, do the same thing for the bra, and put a pin at the center mark. And that will just help us match up these two pieces. We're going to have to stretch the elastic to fit the bra since it's shorter. Okay, so working from the right side, you're going to lay the elastic flat on top, overlapping it by 5/8 of an inch. So we're so used to sewing things right sides together. That's not what we're doing here. We're overlapping it, laying it flat on top, and then matching first at that center front pin. And then you can do each end, but make sure the elastic should extend. Okay, so now you're going to need to stretch the elastic to pin it to the bra, right? So stretch it. Make sure that you're distributing it evenly, that you're overlapping the elastic 5/8 of an inch over the bra, and just work in sections like Andrea is doing here. Stretch a section, get them to match, pin at the center, and then distribute your pins. And the other thing is you're also going to be stretching these two pieces together as you sew, because you want to build in stretch and you want the lower edge of this bra to be supportive. So we're going to spend a bit of time here pinning, because you want to be really careful to be overlapping the correct amount to be stretching, distributing the elastic as you go. So just take your time with this. Do one side and then we're going to move on to the other, and we'll come back and you'll see what the entire thing looks like pinned. All right, so here is the entire length of elastic pinned. And you can see it looks like Andrea went back and corrected this. You should have an inch extending on each side, so extra inch of elastic on both sides of the bra. And you can see it's kind of roughly on the inside, so that's what you should be looking for because we're going to be stretching these two pieces together as we sew them. And that extra inch just gives you a nice tail so you're not starting at the very edge of the elastic, which can be super annoying and even impossible to sew at times. So we're going to be using a zigzag stitch and stitching right next to the edge of the elastic. And I want you to be stretching both sides as you go. So once you get the elastic starting to feed through there, then you can use your left hand to pull from the back and hold both pieces taut, stretching them as you sew. And this builds in stretch to your bra. You want it to move with your body. Okay, so you're just going to continue stitching along this edge of the elastic until you get to the opposite end. Okay, now back stitch. So working from the wrong side, you're going to do another line of zigzag stitching along the edge of the power net. But again, you need to pull from both sides, from front and back as you go to build stretch into the garment. And this will just keep everything nice and flat. You can see how that elastic tail is helping you out here. You're just going to stretch that and continue building stretch into the garment as you sew. All right, so now we're going to attach the bra back closure. So I often get confused and I have to grab a bra just to reference here. So you may want to do that if you're not sure, but the hooks go on the right side of the bra back as worn and the eyes go on the left side as worn. So you're going to take the eye side and you sort of insert the end of the bra back into that little opening at the end. So you just kind of shove it in there and pin it. So make sure that it's all the way in, as far as it can go, and pin it in place. And you can see the hooks are facing up now that we've turned the bra back in as it would be worn, or the eyes are facing up, excuse me. And now we're going to apply the hook side to the right side as worn. And on this side, you kind of fold the hook side in half and sandwich it over the end and pin it in place. If you don't have a bra back like this, you can also use hook and eye tape, though these are really nice. I would recommend you check out our resources because they're created the exact width that you need and they're adjustable as well. So you want to use a zipper foot here because of those metal pieces in the bra back. And you want to edge stitch here, and you can't use a zigzag, of course, as you're using the zipper foot. So you're using a straight stitch here. Make sure that you change that stitch on your machine, otherwise you're going to break a needle. So stitch close to the edge, and then you want to make sure that you're catching the underside as well. So double check your work after you're done, back stitch at the end. And there's the hook side sewn on. And now we're going to do the same thing for the eye side of the bra back. So stitch close to the edge and back stitch. And it's okay if you break a needle, don't worry. Maybe wear safety goggles. I wear glasses, so that's a little bit of protection for me, but you want to back stitch there. It is easy to stitch over metal as you're doing this, so just be careful. All right, so now our bra back is applied And we're ready to move on to the cups, which is the most exciting part of this. Okay, I'm so excited about this technique. We're going to be creating contoured bra cups with a sort of conical projected shape like Marilyn Monroe would like. So we were only able to find these sort of very flat bra cups, not the sort of bullet bra cups that you would see in the 50s. So we're going to be creating darts in the cups with no extra bulk. So here are the steps for this. You want to find the center of the cup. Just sort of guesstimate from the edge to the center what you think the apex of the cup would be. And draw a line. And now you're going to look at your instructions and see how much it says for your cup size you're going to be taking out. We're making an FG cup here, so we need to take out a 2-inch dart. So we're marking an inch on either side of that line for 2 inches total, and then drawing dart legs to the point. And now we're going to cut that little triangle out. So just go ahead and hack into this bra cup. You're just going to be cutting the dart triangle out. You can see it kind of looks like Pac-Man when you're done. And that is what you're looking for. So we don't want to sew a dart traditionally because that would be way too bulky and you would see a lump from the right side of your dress, right? So we're getting rid of that dart triangle. And now you're going to butt those edges together and we're going to zigzag them together. This is a swimwear technique. You might have seen this like on our Esther swimsuit. This is really common with foam cups and it's a great way to sew them without any bulk. You can use a wider zigzag if you need to, but you're going to center your needle right in the gap between those two cups. And as you're sewing, you're going to be pressing those edges together so that there's no gap. And then when you get to the point, you can backstitch. You kind of have to finesse in here with your fingers because you're creating a really rounded shape here, or pointy shape even. Now, if you find that you didn't catch one side, which I think Andrea found here, no problem. You can go back and just fix that section if you didn't quite get both sides. Don't worry about it. You can go back and fix it. Just do another line of stitching and make sure that you're secure on both sides. You can see how much shape already has been built into that cup. All right, so you can see the difference in the cups. One has a lot more of a bullet shape to it than the other, which is much more flat, more of a modern shape to it. So you're going to repeat that dart process with your other cup, and then we'll be ready to sew these into our bra. So what we're going to be doing in this chapter is testing the placement of the bra cups and then attaching them to the power net and then trimming away the power net. So we have really detailed instructions on this in the instructions. But what you're going to be doing is sort of doing a test placement of the cups and then comparing it to your body. So every body is different, right? So you want to make sure that you're happy with our suggested placement. So we have the apex marked on the bra itself, which Andrea is now cutting an X mark into. You don't want to cut too much at this point, no more than 2 inches for each leg of this X. But this is going to allow us to match the apex of the cup to the marked apex on the bra. And you can hold it up to your body, try on the bra, whatever you need to do to make sure that the cups are properly spaced. You may find that they're too wide set or too close together. Marilyn Monroe actually had famously wide set breasts, which was actually considered a really positive because you were not allowed to show cleavage in the movies at this time. There were a lot of morality codes. So you couldn't really push the breasts together. So you were looking for a wide set look. So depending on what your body is, you're going to compare the cup placement to your own body, see if you're happy with it. And if you are, then you are going to go ahead and pin and stitch the cups in place. So you're matching the apex of the cup to the apex on the bra. Now, what you can see here is that there may be overlapping. And of course, this depends on the cup size that you're sewing. So the smaller cup sizes, you may be fine. The larger ones, you're going to have some overlap that can get trimmed away at the upper edge and over the elastic. So you're just going to stitch on the top of the elastic and then trim away any excess bra cup. But go ahead and pin in place. Once you have the placement down, you're going to pin around the edge of the cup. Okay, now we're sort of getting to the end of this pinning here, and you can see it is overlapping the elastic, which is fine, don't worry. And you can just mark in where you want to stitch. So you want to mark in above the elastic, and that's where you're going to be stitching, and then we're going to trim away any excess cup. Okay, so you're going to be working with a zigzag stitch and stitching around the edge of the cup. And just applying it flat to the power net below it. So stitch all the way around. When you get to the bottom of the cup, if you have overhang over your elastic, make sure that you stitch on your marked line rather than the edge of the cup. And just continue all the way around like this. Okay, so once you've stitched around the entire cup, then you can trim away any excess of the cup along the bottom there, along the elastic. So you can see that our stitching slightly overlaps on the elastic, but not too far. So use your best judgment here. Don't worry too much about it. You just don't want to have too much overhang on the elastic. And now we want to go to the wrong side of the bra and trim away the power net from inside the cup. So we already have our X slash there, and so we can use that to start our cutting here. Get rid of this flat circle of power net and build in that contour cup that is custom sized for you. Okay, so that's what your finished cup is going to look like on the inside and then the outside. So repeat that with the other cup, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now we're going to baste the bra to the front bodice only. The bra back stays free, so just keep that in mind in these next steps. So you're placing the bra inside the dress, and we're flipping the uninterfaced strap out of the way and working at this neckline seam allowance. So pinning it center front at the point, the highest point of the neckline, to the side seam. And remember, you have that extra bit that's going to hang at the top of that seam allowance, right? Where we have the extra 5/8 of an inch on the bra front. And then the bra back stays free. So you're going to pin the bra to the seam allowance only, from center front to each side seam. So repeat it on the other side. And then we're going to baste this in place, and then the bra and the dress kind of just gets treated as one. And these seam allowances will get enclosed when we turn down that uninterfaced strap for a clean finish, and you won't see these seam allowances. So we're going to stitch from the side seam to side seam. You can start at center front if that makes it a little easier, and stitch each side separately. There's a lot going on at that center front point, so that can just make it a little bit easier to get that point. Okay, so here we're starting at the side seam actually. So we're going to stitch from the side seam to center front, then break your stitching rather than trying to pivot there. And this is a 1/2 inch seam allowance because this is basting, all right? So it'll be, the true finishing stitch will be when we stitch that free strap down. So this is just for basting to hold these layers together. So it can be a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And if you're using a zigzag, that's fine, but it doesn't have to be a zigzag because this seam actually does not stretch, right? Because we're using a non-stretch woven for the outer dress. So using a straight stitch is fine, but if you're using a zigzag, no big deal. So here we're going to stop at our center front point, break our stitching, move things out of the way, and then start on the other side of center front. That's just going to make it a little bit easier at the center front point rather than trying to pivot. Okay, so continue on like that, basting the bra to the dress, and then we'll be ready to move on. Okay, so here your bra is basted to the inside, and we're just going to treat this as one layer. Okay, so now we are ready to deal with our straps. So they're going to cross over each other at center front, and then they need to go around to the back, and they're going to get attached to, technically it's called the back strap, right? Because it's the strap that's attached to the top of the back bodice and inserted. And then we're going to stitch that opening closed, catching the strap inside. Now, I will say it's really important that you try the dress on at this point and check your strap length. We've already checked this length for me, so we know that it's the exact right length, but you want to check it before you stitch this in place permanently. So you could baste it or you could safety pin it in place and then just give it a quick check to make sure that your length is correct. Or hopefully you've made a muslin and you know it's correct from your muslin. Made any adjustments you need to make. All right, so it gets inserted into the opening on the back strap at the top of the back bodice. And then you're going to pin from the inside all those layers together. And now we're going to stitch this at 5/8 of an inch. So this is attaching the strap and also closing that opening. So make sure you're connecting your lines of stitching with the previous line of stitching here so you don't have any gaps anymore. And stitching at 5/8 of an inch. And you're going to repeat on the other side. And now when you turn everything right side out, I'll trim those seam allowances first though, so you don't have that bulk, the back strap. And now I would just check your work here first, make sure you didn't twist your straps or anything. That would be terrible, but it would be fixable at this point. Okay, so you can see how they cross at center front and then attach to their respective sides on the back. Okay, so now we're gonna understitch this neckline edge, which I talked a little bit about as an option earlier. We've already pressed this edge a little bit, but now if we understitch it, we can get a really clean finished edge. And it's gonna be easier now that we have the strap applied. So what you're going to do is you're going to open out that inner strap, the strap lining from the inside, and you're going to make sure all your seam allowances are underneath the strap lining here, and we're going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. So you're checking as you go that your seam allowances are getting caught in your stitching here, and of course you want your strap to be up and out of the way. You're going to be catching those strap seam allowances right here. And then you're going to continue understitching to center front. So again, this is another instance where we need to do each side separately because of that crucial center front point where the straps overlap. So continue like this until you get to center front and then backstitch. Now the understitching is going to give us a nice edge to be able to press. So just kind of continue to roll the edge out with your fingertips, give it a nice press. We've built a lot of dimension into this bodice now, so it can be a little tricky to press. But take your time with it and keep rolling the edge out with your fingertips and press it to get a nice crisp edge. So you're going to repeat that on the opposite side, of course. And then we're going to be able to move on to inserting our boning, which is very exciting. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is cut your bones to length. So you want them to be the length of the channel from the neckline edge to the waistline seam, but 1/8 of an inch shorter than that. So essentially you could measure from the waistline edge 3/4 of an inch up, and that's the length you need. Okay, and we've finished the ends of our bones. We like to use Teflon tape because you can just wrap it. It's a lot easier than using those metal caps. And then you're going to insert each bone into the channel. And you want to make sure that you insert it between the layers of that channeling, right? It's a tube, so you want to make sure to insert it into the tube. It's very easy to accidentally insert the boning behind the tube, between the lining and the tube. So just double check for that. And then you're going to insert each of these 4 bones. And like I said earlier, if you feel like you need more support, more bones, like please feel free. Especially as you get into larger sizes, you may find you want extra bones in the middle of a panel, and that is totally a fine adjustment to make to this dress. You can add as many boning channels as you want. I would avoid getting too close to the back zipper, of course. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stay stitch at 5/8 of an inch, and you want to be really careful not to stitch over any bones, because of course you will break your needle. So we're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch all the way around, just the lining here. That's the only layer we're stitching through. Okay, so now that you've stay stitched the waistline edge, just do a few clips. There's a curvy part of the waistline sort of around the side seams. So just clip into those curvy parts, clip right up to the stay stitching. And that's going to help us turn this seam allowance in a later step. All right, we are finally moving on to our skirt. And the first thing we're going to do is form that pleat on the skirt front. So before you do that, you want to make sure you stay stitch these sort of inverted corners on the skirt front. That's where those ruched panels are going to get inserted. And now we're going to be working from the right side of the skirt to form this box pleat. So you can fold this in half, and you have your pleat lines marked in on the right side of the skirt. And just like we did with the dart earlier, you want to make sure that your marked lines are aligning from the top layer to the bottom. So put a pin through, check the bottom layer, adjust if needed. And then just keep pinning along that dart line to the bottom of the line. So we're going to stitch along this, and then we're going to press this box pleat in place and top stitch it down. And that's what creates that really beautiful sort of release at the front of this skirt. So that's exactly where, the spot that Andrea is showing us, this is exactly where the line of stitching needs to end. So if you need to remind yourself, you can give yourself another pin there. You don't want to stitch any further than the end of that line. And now we're just going to stitch from top to bottom on that marked line. If you can, you should definitely watch the scene from the movie where Marilyn wears this dress from the 7-Year Itch. You can just see this scene on YouTube, and it's spectacular. You can see how this dress moves. And this pleat in the skirt really gives it the fullness at the front hem that makes it just look so liquid and beautiful. And it all starts with your perfect, careful stitching of this pleat line. And a back stitch at the end. Okay, so now we've got this weird flap on the right side of our skirt, and we need to press it in place and then top stitch it. So this pleat needs to be sort of opened out and then centered exactly over the pleat line that you just stitched. So we're pinning it at the upper edge here, making sure that it's perfectly centered. But what you can do is you can go in from the back now and just kind of steam your stitching just to help you out. So that's what Andrew's going to do now. See that line of stitching that she just did. You don't want to press it down necessarily, but you can just sort of steam it, hover over it, kind of finger press a little bit to get it nice and flat, and then go back to the right side and make sure that this pleat is exactly centered over that stitching. And then press the whole thing down, but just down to the bottom of the pleat line. And we're going to be top stitching each of these edges in place down to the bottom of the pleat stitching. And that's what's going to create this beautiful flat pleat at the top that then opens out, releases into the skirt below. So you're going to pin each of these edges in place. And now you can see Andrew's already top stitched one side. You just want to edge stitch, so just 1/8 of an inch away from that fold. And backstitch when you first start at the waistline, but then instead of backstitching at the bottom, give yourself some thread tails, and we're going to pull it through to the wrong side and tie it off by hand, just like we did for the dart earlier. And you're stitching no lower than the end of the pleat line, so where you stitched the pleat in the previous step. And you want to make sure that that's exactly even on each side of the pleat. You don't want one side of edge stitching to be higher than the other, of course, so just make sure you're even. Leave yourself some thread tails, and then working from the back, you can just pull up a thread loop so that you pull, and use a pin, pull both ends of the thread through to the wrong side, tie them off by hand with a double knot, and then trim close. Okay, so there's your stitched pleat. You want to spend some time now pressing this to get out any little ripples, but again, don't press any further than the lower edge of that pleat stitching. Okay, so now we're going to move on to assembling the side panels of the skirt. Okay, so now we're going to sew these gathered side panels into our skirt front. This is a little bit of a tricky inner corner here. If you've ever sewn our night and day dress, it's really similar to the yoke skirt. So just take your time with this. You need to create those gathering stitches between the circles on each of the side panels, and you can kind of pull them up. We will distribute the gathers, of course, when we pin these together. So right sides together, you're going to do one panel at a time. Oh, and it's really important to clip into your stay stitching at these inner corners here. So clip all the way to your stay stitching so that you are able to pivot at that point. That's the tricky spot right there, okay? So you're gonna put these two right sides together, and you can start on the long end with the gathers and pin on either side of that gathered portion at the circles. And then you can distribute the gathers between them and pull them up more if you need to, or release some gathers, whatever you need to do. Now Andrea's pinning from the side panel side, and I think I would find that really hard to sew it from this side, but she did it like a pro. She is a pro. She had no trouble with it. So I guess it depends on what you find easier. I like to sew from the clip side. So just keep that in mind, that you may find it easier. If one way doesn't work for you, try the other. But we're distributing those gathers here. These are what create that beautiful ruched look on the hips that really creates the look of this skirt. Now, this skirt is already pretty tricky to sew in some places, and the original dress would have been way trickier to sew because it has this really complicated V-shaped waistline that would have been kind of a nightmare. So I simplified a little bit in my version of the design, giving us a sort of traditional waistline, and then the shaping is through these seams and the front box pleat. And of course that means that you can switch this skirt out for other bottoms in the Lamour series. So hopefully you saw all the samples we made. There's that really cute romper with the Loretta shorts. Okay, so now we're pinning the other side, the sort of horizontal side of this faux yoke. And because we've clipped into that seam allowance, we can create a corner here. Sort of manipulate the center front skirt piece to form a corner. So that's that tricky pivot point right there. And you want to kind of use some extra pins here and really sew with care. So for me, I would rather sew from that side with the clip so that I can see what's going on there. But you may find, like Andrea, you prefer to stitch from this side, and that works better for you. So either way is fine, but just, try a couple ways, see which works better for you. All right, so now we're continuing to pin down the skirt, matching the notches. This part's easy, right? Just a simple skirt seam. Just fill in pins here, and then we're gonna go sew. Okay, so we're starting to sew at the hem here. This is that nice straight edge before we get to the tricky part. And stitching at 5/8 of an inch. Now, when you get to the gathers, you can just kind of use your fingers to make sure that they stay in place, kind of press them down a little bit as you sew. It is kind of nice to sew with the gathers on top, so that's one point in favor of sewing from this side. Now we're getting close to that pivot point, that inner corner here. So be really mindful of what's going on the underside of your fabric here. Make sure you're not sewing any pleats, any excess fabric bunching underneath. You're going to pivot at that circle right here. That's that tricky point. Swing around, make sure that you have no folds underneath on the underside here, and continue stitching to finish off this sort of faux yoke seam. Now, Andrea made that look really easy. And you'll see when she turns it right side out that she's going to check to make sure she didn't accidentally get any puckers or little pleats at that point. And it's really easy to do, so don't be discouraged if you do get a pucker at that point. Just take your stitches out right in that corner right there and go back and redo it, okay, until you get it right. But you don't have to redo the whole seam, of course. Just focus on that one little pivot point. Okay, so now we're ready to press this seam. So you do it in 2 stages. First, we're going to do this sort of like slanted horizontal part, and that is going to get pressed down towards the hem. And on the vertical side, we're going to press the seam open. So it makes it a little easier if you want to work on a ham or another raised surface for this, just because otherwise if you're pressing flat on the surface, you can accidentally get wrinkles pressed in or folds. So raised surface really helps here. We also sometimes pull out the sleeve board for these long seams. Now, of course, this area is much simpler. It's just a nice flat area. Okay, so you did it. That's one side of the side panel, and you're going to repeat for the opposite side. Now we're going to work on the skirt back. This skirt has a really beautiful, dramatic, deep yoke here. You can see that dramatic slant to the yoke. We have a little tiny dart at the top of the skirt back that we're going to sew now, just like we did the bust darts. I want to note, though, that before you do this, make sure that you applied your stay tape at the center back edge on the yoke. You can see it there, that black strip on the yoke. And then there's a little tiny bit you have to apply to the top of the skirt back, just down to the zipper mark. So that stay tape is going to stabilize our zipper. So make sure that you have it anywhere that the zipper is going to be inserted. Okay, so there is our pinned dart. This is just a tiny little dart. It really is beautiful. I hope it shows up a little bit better in a solid color. I was a little disappointed that with the samples, especially the polka dot one, you couldn't see the beautiful seaming on the back of this skirt. So hopefully in a solid color, you'll get the effect a little bit better. So again, you're tying those dart threads off by hand. And you can trim, and then we're going to press the dart towards center back. And of course, anytime you're pressing a dart, you should be using a ham. We have this fabulous ham in the studio with cats printed on it. You're going to press it towards center back. And now we're ready to sew the yoke seam. So you can put the yoke and the skirt right sides together. There's a notch on the yoke that matches the dart. So match that first and pin, and then continue to pin the rest of that seam. And you can see that we've already finished all of our edges on the skirt with serging without trimming anything off. You can do that. You can also, if you're lining the skirt, which is a great way to finish this skirt beautifully, you don't necessarily need to finish those skirt seam allowances, though I always like to because, it's a free hanging lining. So it's just a little bit nicer to have them finished. So serging ahead of time is a great way to do it. Okay, and you can see, yet again, we have a little corner that's overhanging at the beginning of this seam. Again, that's not a problem. It's just where the seam allowance is matching. The seam line is matching up, but the seam allowance is slightly off. And that's what happens when you have an extreme shape like this, a really dramatic angle. So stitching at 5/8 of an inch. And then the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to press these seam allowances down as one. If you like, you can press the seam allowances open first. That can kind of help get a nice crisp seam line, but not totally necessary. The important thing is that they get pressed down ultimately. And now you can see the stay tape there is continued down to the zipper circle. Okay, so repeat on the other skirt back, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now we're going to assemble the skirt vertical seams. So center back seam from the zipper circle down, you're going to put these two skirt backs right sides together. And from sort of the base of your stay tape, you're going to pin and stitch from the zipper circle down to the hem. Okay, now starting at our zipper circle, you're going to backstitch and stitch at 5/8 of an inch all the way down to the hem and backstitch again. Nice simple seam after those complicated yoke seams. Okay, now this gets pressed open. And your next step, which we're not going to show on camera, will be to sew the skirt front to the skirt back at the side seams. So that's a pretty easy one. Again, just pin and stitch at 5/8 of an inch, and then your skirt will be completely assembled. For the skirt lining, you would repeat all these steps we did in this chapter. So it doesn't, of course, have all the complicated seaming and pleating and gathering and all of that, the lining pieces for the skirt. So you would just sew the center back seam and then the side seams, and then your skirt lining would be completed as well. All right, so we've already inserted the skirt lining into the skirt, wrong sides together, and basted along the waistline edge, but leaving 2 inches unbasted at the center back on both sides, just like we did for the neckline. Okay, so now we're going to pull that bodice lining out of the way so it's completely free. And you're going to pin the skirt unit to the outer bodice. So you can start at your sort of more obvious match points, like the side seams, pin those together, and then you'll have notches to match throughout. So then go to match your notches and then fill in pins in between each of those match points. So we're going to pin all the way around the waistline. And we're going to show you how to sew those lining flaps, those 2 free inches at the center back on either side. So just leave those 2 inches of the lining free while you're pinning. Okay, so now we're going to start stitching at the center back, and you can see the 2-inch flap of lining is folded out of the way at this point. We're stitching at 5/8 of an inch. And you're going to stitch right up to where the lining flaps away there, just right up to the fold of it, no further though, and then back stitch. And then break your stitching, pull it out of the machine, trim your threads. Now fold the flap down and then restart your stitching. It's okay if those 2 lines of stitching overlap a little bit here. I always found in pattern instructions, they just say, leave 2 inches free, but then don't actually explain how to do this part, and I always found that confusing. So hopefully you find this part helpful. So you still have 2 inches of lining free, but the rest of the skirt is sewn. So now we're just stitching all the way around until we get to the other side, and then again we need to be really careful to leave those 2 inches of lining free. Okay, so now we're approaching the other side, and you can see Andrea gave her an X with pins here. So she remembered to stop, backstitch, and then break your stitching. You're going to pull it out of the machine, and then fold your 2 inches of lining out of the way. And now you can start stitching underneath, right? So, and here you have to be really careful that your 2 lines of stitching just butt up against each other, because you don't want to have a little gap in your stitching here. So start again, back stitch, and then complete this seam at center back. And then you have a sewn waistline seam, which is really exciting because it's like you almost have a dress now. Okay, so now we're going to, well, first you want to check for any puckers here, and we do have a little pucker, so no big deal. You can go back, you can take out that section, rip that section out, re-stitch, but just double check your work here. Yeah, just a little pucker, very easy to fix. And then the next thing you're going to do is grade your seam allowances, just like we did earlier. You want your bodice seam allowance to be the wider one, and then the skirt should be the narrower seam allowance. Okay, so the skirt seam allowance you can trim down to about 1/8 of an inch, and then the bodice should be about 1/4 inch. And then they both get pressed up towards the bodice. Now we're just going to clip into the waistline seam allowance just around the curvier parts, so about either side of the side seams, and that helps the waistline lay really smooth. So now you're going to press this seam up, and again, it helps to have a ham or some other raised surface to help you here. You're going to press the seam allowances towards the bodice. And then once that's done, we're ready to insert the zipper. Okay, now we're ready to sew the underlap side of our zipper. So if you've seen any of our videos before, you know we have a very specific way of sewing lap zippers at Charm, and we do it in 2 stages. So we sew the underlap side first, and that is the right side as you're looking at the back of the dress. So you're going to turn that seam allowance in 1/2 an inch and press it. Now this means you're gonna have a tiny little 1/8 of an inch underlap at the base of the zipper opening, okay? So that's totally fine because underneath the zipper circle, you have a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, okay? But above the circle, you've pressed it in 1/2 an inch. Now you're gonna grab your zipper and you're gonna take that pressed in seam allowance, place it over the zipper. So it's just on top of the zipper tape, and the fold of the dress is right next to the zipper teeth. And you want to pay attention to the top of the zipper. The metal stop should be just right under the neckline edge. And you're pinning through the layers of the dress and the zipper tape, making sure that the fold of the seam allowance that you just pressed is flush right up against the zipper tape, but not over it at all. And you're going to continue pinning down to the zipper circle. Now, it's a good idea. We always sew our zippers from top to bottom, so you can see the way Andrea is orienting her pins with the sharp side facing up towards the neckline, because that's the easiest way for you to be able to pull them out as you're sewing. Okay, now you want to make sure you've got a zipper foot installed, and we're going to start at the very top up here. And you can see here how that metal zipper stop is just right underneath the upper neckline edge. And she's got the lining folded out of the way. All right, we're going to start stitching here and back stitch, and this stitching should be right on the edge of that fold. It's really important to be careful to hold these layers nice and flat as you're stitching here. Of course, it's really easy to get puckers as you sew a zipper, so just use your hands to hold everything nice and taut. Make sure you're not accidentally stitching your lining underneath here, which might have just happened. So be really careful here. And sometimes your dress, the seam allowance, the folded seam allowance will kind of start to inch away from the zipper teeth, especially at the waistline seam, anywhere there's a little bit of bulk. So you can hold it nice and taut front to back like this. Take out your pins as you go, but not too soon. And then you're stitching right on that fold and being really careful that the fold stays nice and flush up against the zipper teeth. And of course, the zipper is open at this point. And you're going to stitch all the way down to the base and then back stitch. Okay, this is our back stitch point. And that's your underlap side completed. So at this point, you close your zipper again, and you can press it if you want, and we're gonna move on to the overlap side next. Now we're ready to do the overlap side of the zipper, which is the left side of the dress as you're looking at the back. This seam allowance, you wanna turn in the full 5/8 of an inch. So turn in and press. And this side is a little bit trickier to sew only because we have to make sure that our match points all match, right? Like the waistline, the V point of the yoke, and also because this side has visible top stitching. So take your time with this side. It's very doable, but there are a couple things you want to watch out for here.
Okay, so that's the side we just sewed, the underlap side of the zipper. Now we're going to take our overlap half that we just pressed in 5/8 of an inch, and you're going to place it over the zipper tape and teeth. And you want that folded in edge to just cover the line of stitching that you just did. And you want to start with your match points. So first, your waistline seam. Really important that that matches. It'll drive you crazy if it doesn't. So make sure it's exactly matching, and then go to your next match point. So your strap, you want that seam to match from side to side here. And then you can fill in pins in between those two. Again, with the pins oriented in the same direction, with the pointy side going up towards the neckline. Now you want to make sure the V shape of the yoke matches in a sort of chevron shape here. And then I always put a horizontal pin at the base of the zipper opening because that's where we're going to be pivoting our stitching. The top stitching of a lap zipper always looks like an L, right? So you're going to be pivoting at the very bottom. Now you're going to open your zipper all the way. And finally, you can place your last pin. It's hard to pin when the zipper is closed because of the bulk of the pull. And now we're ready to do this top stitching step. So the top stitching is 3/8 of an inch from the folded edge, and you're stitching through both seam allowances and through the zipper tape again. And the most important thing about this side is to just really keep everything nice and flat. You want to hold the surface nice and taut. You can see how Andrea is holding it from the back there to create a nice taut surface. If you let it sort of drag in front of the machine or have folds falling in front of the machine, you're much more likely to get little puckers or folds in your stitching or for those seam lines to not match up. So be very careful here. Just hold everything nice and taut. Hold from front to back and stitch at 3/8 of an inch. So you're stitching as far as you can down. You're going to get to a point where you run into the zipper pull. And you'll see, yep, there it is. So we're going to go as far as we can. And then you're going to stop with your needle down, lift your presser foot, and close the pull just to get it out of the way. And now the rest, this is tricky because the rest of this stitching is really just eyeballed, right? But you should be able to follow sort of the trajectory of your stitching up till now and get a nice straight line. And then at where the zipper opening starts, you're going to pivot. Okay, so needle down, and then you're going to pivot 90 degrees and stitch across the base of the zipper. And of course, be careful that you're not stitching over any metal stops here. So that's your lap zipper sewn. Look how beautiful that looks. So if you see ripples, don't worry, you can press them out here. All right, so we're going to talk you through some hand finishing here. It's a lot of hand stitching, so we're not going to show it all on camera, but here's what you're going to do. You're going to turn in your seam allowances, starting at the back zipper tape. And I would start at the skirt seam allowance, so below the waist. You're going to be turning in those seam allowances and then stitching them to the zipper tape. So yeah, start here at that back lining seam allowance, slip stitch it to the zipper tape, and then same thing above the waist, and then all around the waistline edge, press it in first, and then slip stitch, so you get a beautiful clean finish here. And then we have the strap, or, it sort of becomes the band at the neckline. So that also needs to be turned in and hand stitched. I personally would hand stitch it. If you're someone who hates hand stitching, you're probably miserable right now. So you may want to try stitching in the ditch with this. You could fold it over, pin from the right side, and then stitch in the ditch from the right side.
Maybe a little tricky with all those layers, but it would be a way to avoid a little bit of that hand stitching. And then let's look at the center point, because that's the tricky part here, right? You're gonna need to clip in, make sure that you've clipped all the way to your stitching so that you're able to really enclose those seam allowances in the strap. And get a nice clean finish there too. And of course we have this overlap on the strap as well. One thing we found was that it can be helpful to do a little hand tacking where the strap overlaps, just to hold everything in place so it doesn't kind of slip out of place right here as you're wearing the dress. I kind of like how it looks if it's more stable right there. So just a little tacking on the underside there is a great place to hand stitch. And then hemming the dress, let's talk about that. So you definitely want to let this hang for about 24 hours, level it up from the ground. And then you're going to turn it up and machine or hand stitch. So we've given you a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on this dress. And then you're done.
Okay, everyone, that is it, your finished Monroe dress. I hope you have loved sewing along with us today. I cannot wait to see what you create from this pattern, so please do share your finished creations. I am at Gertie18 on Instagram, and you can use the hashtags Monroe Dress and Charm Patterns. And of course, I want to tell you that we are on Patreon as well, and we release a new vintage-inspired pattern every single month, and we have a wonderful community over there, so I do hope you'll join us. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!